Hi there, welcome. It's great to see you. Thanks for stopping by today. I'm John Merriman, and this is your Tuesday morning guitar song. They took out Bonanza. The Smothers Brothers, they took out Bonanza. Here's the story. As you probably know, Bonanza was that popular TV Western back in the 1960s. It was #1 in this country from like 63 to 66. There were 3 networks back then, so there were 2 shows opposite Bonanza. In the business, that slot opposite Bonanza was called the suicide slot because the shows there were not going to be successful. No one was going to watch them. Everybody's watching Bonanza. So CBS had the hardest time filling their suicide slot. They couldn't keep a show there for over a season. So CBS thought, well, what are we going to do? What about those 2 nice young folk singing guys, those brothers, the Smothers Brothers? They're clean cut and everybody likes them, and they're totally expendable. Let's offer them that slot to see if they want to do a show. Well, that would be Tom and Dick, the Smothers Brothers. Dick was the straight guy, and Tom or Tommy was the kind of the man-child, goofy comedian. He provided all the humor in the act. And they started out being straight-ahead folk singers. They went to San Jose State University, and when they left, they started performing in clubs. And they started getting so much attention for their goofy, between-song patter that they started veering the act more into comedy. And they finally ended up being comedians and musicians all at the same time. They were stand-up musical comedians. Well, they got pretty popular. They got a record contract in 1964 with Mercury Records, and they produced a string of very popular comedy music albums. Some of them were up in the top 40. Then they started getting more national attention on TV. They started doing guest slots on variety shows like The Jack Paar Show. And then in 1965, they were offered a sitcom. And it's a little-known sitcom. They played character actors on it. They played roles, and it had really nothing to do with their music. It was not successful and only lasted about half a season. Then, in 1967, CBS came calling with their offer to do the suicide slot on the other side of Bonanza. Now, Tommy Smothers, who plays the fool in the group, is really incredibly smart, highly perceptive, and the main creative force in that duo. He's shrewd, and he knew exactly what CBS was doing. And he very craftily gave them an offer back. He said, we will do this slot if we get total creative control of our show, and we can hire whoever we want to do the show. Well, CBS thought, hey, what could go wrong? These are just nice young guys and everybody loves them. They're clean-cut, all Americans, so sure, yeah, we'll do the deal. But, and this is non-negotiable, CBS said, you have to deliver your show to us 10 days in front of airtime, and it has to go through our CBS censors like every show does. And that was non-negotiable. CBS had censors and every network had censors. They were there to make sure that none of the content was offensive and insulting in any way that would cause somebody to turn the channel and go watch Bonanza. So the Smothers Brothers said, yippee, sure, let's go. But what CBS could not realize, they didn't have the ability to really think this out at the time. They just gave away 1 hour of their prime time to 2 folk singers. And the folk music and the protest movement were born arm in arm. Historically, the folk music movement and the social change music movement were always right with each other, all the way back to Pete Seeger and the Weavers, up to Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. The times were changing, and it was the folk musicians who were out there providing the soundtrack for it. And CBS just invited 2 little folk singers into their big status quo prime time. Well, in CBS's defense, the Smothers Brothers were not political before, but all their friends were, and they hired all their friends. They hired the youngest, smartest comedy writers of the day to tackle all the issues of social change at that time. The Vietnam War, race relations, sex and drugs. And hey, let's produce a show. They went for it. And they delivered their show to CBS 10 days ahead of airing. CBS said thank you and took it to their censors, and the censors just about had a heart attack. They freaked out. And so the battle began. It's famous now, the battle between the Smothers Brothers and the CBS censors that became a battle with the whole network toward the end. In 2.5 years, CBS yanked the show mid-season. It illegally fired them. The Smothers Brothers went to court and they won. By the time they got a decision, it was 2 years later. Times had changed and the show was just not quite as relevant. But that's the story of the Smothers Brothers. But they took out Bonanza. Bonanza was number 4 by the time the Smothers Brothers got done. Yes. Some of the great comedy writers the Smothers Brothers hired back then, where they got their start, was Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Don Novello, and Albert Brooks. And the head writer who was in charge for writing the whole show was Mason Williams. And that brings us up to your Tuesday morning fun fact. Here's your Tuesday morning fun fact. Mason Williams was the head comedy writer for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. He was a friend of theirs for many years, and when they started their show, they immediately thought of him because he also was a stand-up musical comedian, which most people don't realize. He had a string of records he did in the early 1960s for VJ Records of musical comedy, which were successful, and he fit perfectly in with what the Smothers Brothers wanted to do. He also wrote the song, as you probably know, Classical Gas. And this is not a song he would usually write, but why he wrote this song is kind of a fun story. He lived in Southern California, and he would often go to musician parties where people would hang out, and they would sit in a circle and pass around a guitar, and everybody would do the latest song they were working on. Well, when the guitar came to him, he really didn't have anything that he thought was good enough, and so he wrote Classical Gas to be his party song. The song he would play when he got the guitar. It was upbeat, it was happy, he could play it, he could pass the guitar on to the next guy. So, from those humble beginnings, Classical Gas was released as a single and became one of the greatest instrumental pop records of all time. So, boys and girls, don't ever throw those songs out because you never know where they're going to end up. Let's go ahead and play this song from 1969, Mason Williams, Classical Gas. Please don't go away. I'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for stopping by today and spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. It's so good to see you. And if you give a second, please like the show. If you have 2 seconds, share the show on your social media. We are a word-of-mouth operation, and you are my word of mouth. Be kind to everybody you meet this week, and come back and see me. And remember, you're never ready for your day without a song in your heart. Bye now.